The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Pastor Mike, good afternoon. You're on Mannin Line on Manx Radio through till 1 today. Open line on 1366 1368. WhatsApp 166 177. Email studio@manxradio.com and SMS message 166 177. Talked a lot about the WEEE directive, the disposal of waste, electrical and electronic waste last week. The European legislation adopted by the UK, but not the Isle of Man. And that's still going on, really. A manager of a company which has got the tender to dispose of electrical and electronic waste on the Isle of Man says more education is needed. More about why prices have increased. And crikey, have they increased for getting rid of electrical and electronic waste on the Isle of Man. If you're taking a TV or anything, or a microwave, fridges, tablets, electronic tablets, blimey. Since the start of the year, people have been leaving appliances at amenity sites have been charged for the first time or have seen existing charges increased. Now, Middle Park Recycling and Middle Park Metals is a company, and Paul Cortine is from there, and he says the new pricing for waste, electrical and electronic equipment, this WEEE, that we keep talking about, WEEE. This is all due to changes in the UK. And of course, who's paying for it? We're paying for it.
The small WEEE and large domestic WEEE is now being dealt with slightly differently. So whereas before you may have gone to the civic community site and disposed of a Dyson Hoover, for example, free of charge, there is now a potential cost implication for that, for the disposal of that. It's not because somebody sat here and dreamt it up on the island. It's reactionary to requirements in the UK, but also there are these requirements to separate out other WEEE, small WEEE, large domestic WEEE, which that is deriving costs that the public isn't necessarily used to or familiar with having to pay. There's been various comments made. People don't like to pay costs for things. The reality of it is we're well used to disposing of fridges and freezers, etc., responsibly, and have been educated to know that there is a fee and a cost involved in that, because there is a cost all the way through the process of disposing of that. Those items don't carry a net worth or value. It's more a case perhaps of education as opposed to this being dreamt up or profiteering or this type of angle. It isn't. It's reactionary to a requirement for it to be taken out of the general waste stream to be dealt with in a slightly different way. The absolute truth of it is some of the costs for that are still to be ironed out, because statistically the island, for example, has very little data on small WEEE and how much is produced, because it didn't used to be separated out. So the actual final cost for dealing with that small WEEE is a little bit of an unknown at this stage. The bulk cost is in the shipping of all of these commodities, and that's where a significant proportion of the fees that are being charged effectively by the civic community sites comes from.
So where's the plus in this? If you could tell me what the plus is to the end user, i.e. the general public, the people who bought these electronic and electrical goods in all good faith. Nobody said, by the way, you're going to be charged when they come to the end of their life. Now you're going to be charged to take them. And this is not just fridges. It's not just washing machines and things like that and microwaves. Cookers. Get rid of a cooker, get rid of a treadmill, get rid of a dishwasher, a lawnmower, £12 now to get rid of an oil-filled radiator, because you're £6 to get rid of, an exercise bike or a rowing machine, £12 to get rid of them. So suddenly, for getting rid of stuff, now we're being charged. Now, we know all the regulations, the WEEE, disposal of waste, electrical and electronic waste, but we are being charged. And as Paul Cortine said, nobody likes to be charged, particularly when it really hasn't been mentioned that much. and suddenly it's going up, and you know full well what's going to happen. Well, let me ask you a question. Can you imagine the costs ever coming down? Do you think they're ever going to say, complete mistake, it's all free now? Well, they could, of course, if it was charged in rates. If suddenly the rates went up to cope with all this and then it was free. Otherwise, what's going to happen? Well, there are various ways of getting around it. One somebody mentioned last week, buying an angle grinder. Some people may find that tempting. Of course, I'm not advocating that you do it, but it could be tempting. Text, email, call and WhatsApp. We're on till 1 and Julian's first with us today. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Andy. Did I just hear Paul Courtine say that the bulk cost is in the shipping?
I think he did,
that's what
yes.
He said, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So if the new American administration does what they did the last time back in 2016 and all the fuel prices drop massively, when I seem to remember we had a much cheaper fuel at the pumps, and especially diesel was way cheaper, I take it the cost will come down, or is it going to be something similar to the post office removing the air travel in the name of saving money? And is it £1 to send a letter now across?
Well, it is, and they never, we kept asking them how much they were saving by not using airmail anymore, and we never got an answer from it.
It's like a game, this, isn't it? You've got to keep your eye on the ball with this stuff, I think.
Well, but the only problem is it's kind of deflating because we all know who ends up paying.
Yeah, and the cost of things like aluminium has gone up massively, and copper and stuff. So when you're sending stuff away with all this WEEE charges, surely whoever at the other end is selling on that material once it's cleared of whatever unit it's in, the price that they'll receive will go up, won't it?
And we've never heard from this. Now, as the recycling on the aluminium cans go to a material reprocessor somewhere in the north of England. Now, and obviously aluminium is 100% recyclable. Obviously aircraft parts, car parts, cans again. But nobody says. They just say they're nameless material reprocessors in the north of England, just like the steel cans go to metal merchants, and then they, on the Isle of Man, export them to the UK. But we don't know. And I don't know about you, but we pay for this now, so surely the time has come for full transparency. Where's it going? How much is being paid? And where's our money going to?
Yeah, it's kind of nice if the material price is being yielded higher for those scrap people. Well, it'd be kind of nice to have the upstream back to us a bit, wouldn't it?
Well, I'm all for, put it this way, the guys in scrap metal on the Isle of Man do a great job because they take a lot of stuff away that otherwise will be slung here, there and everywhere. But, we all know the prices of metals goes up and down, but of course they're then having to pay steam packet costs to get, unless they use Mezeron, of course, to get off the island. So we're always at a loser because we have to pay freight costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've got a question for you. You may be able to answer this definitively. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Manx Radio building back in the 1920s was used by the Air Ministry, and I think it became a radar training building. Have you got any idea of that?
It wasn't built until the Second War, so it was the 1940s it was built. It was built by the Navy. It was HMS Valkyrie, and it was used to train naval ratings in radar. The new technologies that had come about, and the sweep of Douglas Bay was perfect. So they were all, I think their quarters were down on Loch Promenade. They put 3 or 4 hotels together, and they used to march them up and down in fair weather and foul up Douglas Head and train I think 30,000 ratings were trained in radar in HMS Valkyrie that we now sit.
The reason I ask is the Isle of Man Examiner of February the 13th, 1931 mentions that the meteorological office for the island was on Douglas Head. So I wonder if there's anyone that knows where that was housed at the time. And it would be kind of interesting to know, because I'd like to know what the location of it, because, of course, it was recording the wind, rain and sun information. And if it is on Douglas Head, it's about 200 feet below the Carnane Hills behind, which I think are almost at 500 feet. So actually it's 300 feet difference, because I think you're at 200 feet. It just makes you wonder when the meteorological office moved to Ronaldsway, which of course is far more exposed, I wonder how the weather data changed, moving from the east of the island to the west of the island and down in the south there.
Believe you me, it gets pretty exposed up here anyway, as anybody will tell you from Friday.
Yeah. Yesterday, Howard Kane did a really good old news podcast on historical storms. And it also reminded me, it was mentioned on Friday last week on Manx Radio that Storm Eowyn's barometric pressure was a very incredibly low 938 millibars. And subsequently stronger storms driven by climate change. And I noticed that the much stronger Storm Dara that happened a little while before that had a barometric pressure of 977, so it's significantly higher. The Great Storm of 1987, the one that blew down tens of thousands of trees in the south of England, that was at 953, and their wind gusts were up to 137 miles an hour. So one particular storm, though, I'd like to mention, inspired by Howard Kane, and that was recorded at 965 millibars. It was still higher than Eowyn the other day. It was described by the Mona's Herald newspaper on March the 4th, 1903. That's 122 years ago as the Great Cyclonic Storm. And it described a storm of the 26th of February 03 with headlines like unprecedented damage, St. German's Church, Peel in ruins, All Saints Church, Douglas, stripped. It also stated, scarcely a building throughout the island, whether town or country, has not suffered from its tearing and destroying effects. Hundreds of trees uprooted. On the North Quay, Athol Street, Duke Street and Strand Street, many hundreds of slates were blown onto pavements and smashed to bits. As the Gaiety Theatre, a large number of heavy glass panes in the lantern roof were forced in. The Bellevue exhibition shed, which was 300 feet long and 20 feet wide, was turned over as if a great box and was completely destroyed. So I'm just wondering, with 122 years ago with these storms and things, if it happened now, I mean, for a start, would we need a new colour instead of a red warning? And how are we going to classify it? Is it going to be like a major incident or an emergency major incident?
I wonder what the next colour is. I think it could be purple, couldn't it?
Well, yeah.
After yellow and amber and red, vermilion perhaps.
Yeah. And what's interesting is when you go back in history, as Howard pointed out yesterday, I noticed the Isle of Man Times on Christmas Day, 1894, so 130 odd years ago, on the previous Friday, barometer read 945, so still higher than Eowyn. The article described that almost every house in Athol Street and the surrounding district sustained damage. The stables at the Crown Bakery were unroofed. A correspondent at St Mark's reports that the roofs were blown from two houses and the damage in the haggards, or farmyards, that has never occurred in living memory. Port Erin was almost completely wrecked by the storm, the windows blown in on all the houses along the seafront. The hurricane was of such overwhelming force that even the trawlers were unable to stay. Peel fishermen said that never in their experience have they known of so severe a blow since the terrible January gale of 1839, which was 55 years earlier and almost 200 years ago.
Who'd have thought that weather sticks around?
Exactly. I mean, we do live in the Irish Sea, so I suppose, if you're going to worry about weather and stuff, maybe it's not the best place to live.
All right. Okay. Good to hear from you, Julian. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Andy. Cheers.
Good to be with you. 20 past 12 it is now. And a quick word about that podcast. All you need to do is go to manxradio.com, click on podcasts, and you can find the old news podcast that Howard does every week. It's fantastic. Just looks at what used to happen in the Isle of Man and what happens nowadays, and there are some great ones on it. So have a look at that at manxradio.com and the podcast section. Here's Howard with us now. Hi, Howard.
Hello, Andy. Just in reference to what you were talking there a minute ago about your building with the studios, yes, you're quite right. It was HMS Valkyrie. The whole of the area up there was taken over by the UK government, the British government. And as you say, it was radar was in its infancy, and they were bringing large numbers of various military personnel to the island and training in them the use of radar. I can remember on the Victoria Pier for many, many years, up till the late 70s, there was an angle iron mast with a radar on top, and that was just by the harbour master's office on the end, and that was there for many, many years. But one thing, and I'd like to be corrected on this, because the Isle of Man was used in the training of radar, after the wars had finished, the British government just up sticks and left, and the majority of the equipment was left here. And the Manx government of the time bought it all. And it is said that the Isle of Man harbour, Douglas Harbour, was the first commercial harbour in the world to be operated and using radar.
Now, I've heard something about that, but I've never heard it confirmed. When did you hear about that?
Oh, it's ages. I've got some photographs, etc., in the house, and one of the things I saw not so very long ago on, funny enough, YouTube, was the steam packet vessel Tynwald, and she was using that radar to come into Douglas, and there was a film crew in the bridge, and there was 5 degrees, and they were actually using the radar to navigate into Douglas in bad weather. And this is a black and white Pathé News film that's on YouTube. You could probably find it by searching on it, but I watched that, and that was all after the war, obviously, and it was using that particular radar, and I'm assuming it's what the Manx government bought, and then used it. But I have a photograph of where you drive up that ramp to come off the main road.
Yeah.
All on that grass area, the Nissen huts. And they were used, and right through to the back of the old Douglas Head Hotel.
Yeah, am I right in thinking, I think the Douglas Head, because there were all sorts of kind of espionage aerials up. It was an outstation for Bletchley Park, I think, at one time.
It could well have been, very much so, because during the war, obviously, you didn't know an awful lot that was going on. Things would come out later. But one day I was cutting, I go down to the obscure, and I was cutting back the gorse and whatnot, and I found a concrete block, and it had the WD and the arrow on it, and number 3. And I was curious, it was a decent-sized block, and it was in the gorse, and it was in the grass, etc., and it's just on the steps as you go down, just before you get the obscura on the right-hand side. And that day, you couldn't move it. You couldn't just pick it up and walk away with it. And that, apparently, where that land had been taken by the British government, that was a marker. There was 1, 2, 3, and possibly 4, all that corner. And that's down there. It's still there yet. I cut round it last year.
It's funny, Howard, there's a lot of military, Second War military concrete and First War military concrete still around. And yet, we haven't got any official walks for that. I mean, lots of places around the UK and certainly on the continent do that sort of thing. But we've got lots of things around, haven't we?
The island was basically, you look at Ronaldsway Airport, that was HMS Urley, which, when you interpret from the Manx language, is Eagle.
Yeah.
And I worked there for a long number of years, and we were refueling the aircraft, and we were using the original tanks put in when it was the Royal Navy Air Station. And they were using Barracudas and various other aircraft for training.
That's right. It was Fleet Air on, wasn't it?
It was. And when we closed down the old farmers, there were 9 tanks. And when we closed them down, I thought this is a crying shame, because the original dipsticks were marked Royal Navy Air Station, Isle of Man, and dated. And you can find them now, because I took some of them out of the tanks. They are now down at the Military Museum at the airport. And I thought it was a shame, because you can get replicas, but you'll never get originals. And that's what these 2 are, that are down in the Military Museum before they filled the tanks in and destroyed them.
Wow.
But, there was an awful lot. All the equipment that we had down there was ex-military. Even the pumps They were over-engineered, and the original pumps that were put in during that time were still running in 1999.
Okay.
That's when we closed the old farm down.
Appreciate that, Howard. Thanks for calling us today.
Okay, take care. Bye.
All right, 26 minutes past 12. Somebody said, yes, I've just looked up on Google, and the first harbour to have radar was Douglas Harbour. Fantastic. There are lots of books, actually, about the war, the two wars on the Isle of Man. Obviously, Island of Barbed Wire, Connery Chappell wrote that, I think, in the 1980s. And certainly Matthew Richardson from Manx National Heritage has written books. But really, there's no tour, and there's... To be mercenary about it, there is money in it. There are military tours to be done because the island played such a unique part in the Second and First Wars, being basically a floating internment camp. It's there. Maybe somebody will think about that. Fly tipping is very wrong, but it will now happen. Now people are getting charged for more for less all the time, says Alan. All the amenity sites should be controlled centrally, says Hillary. The public should be encouraged to recycle as much stuff as possible. We need to look at other countries like Sweden and how they do their recycling. If there was an all-island rate, all the amenity sites run centrally. The disposal of electric goods and appliances should be included in this and therefore free to all residents. There shouldn't be any additional charges, so putting an end to fly tipping, we need to protect the Isle of Man's biosphere status. And a very good point, Hillary. We have a biosphere status to protect, and also the look of the Isle of Man, the aesthetics of the Isle of Man, with not a lot of litter. Many times, you probably know, if you have visitors or relatives that come to the Isle of Man, they all comment about the lack of litter, the fact you can drive down a country road and it's not lined either side with litter. In fact, it's the one thing you notice when you head to the UK, litter. I mean, that road that goes from Heysham Port into Lancaster, both sides covered in litter, and we don't. So there's the litter aspect, the aesthetic aspect, but also the fact that we pay for this. It's not charity, we pay for all this. And Frank says, I wonder how we're going to cope if we get the extra £15,000, 15,000 people with their families that the government want. I can't even get to the surgery to pick up the phone because they're so busy. So what are we going to do about this? Realistically, who's going to pay to get rid of a tablet or a laptop by taking them to the civic amenity site? It says 475. They're going to be placed into bins and they will end up in landfill. Somebody mentioned last week, get an angle grinder. WEEE has resulted in no refuse at Western sites. Many unusable goods are now being dumped. What about reduce, reuse and recycle? Now, no reuse. So it's counterproductive. And maybe if there was a centralised, organised, coordinated strategy, then maybe we could come to some sort of decision and a strategy for the future. That's what's needed, says Don. We need strategy. I consider the new electrical disposal costs to be the price we're paying for climate change. How many storms have we had recently? The worst in how many years? Look at the damage around us. We've created this mess, so we're paying for it, says Bob. Yes, Bob, but is everybody paying equally? In many places around the world, they don't. They just lob it away. And David H. said, more education is needed. What a pretension. It's actually their lack of information. Give us more information, says David H. In Search of UK website shows disposal of WEEE is free at amenity sites. Collection charges are cheaper than the Isle of Man, and 57% of items are recycled. G says something is fishy about this. And Desmond says, I can understand fridge and freezer and plasma TVs because of all the gas involved, but they won't let you recycle working TVs, computers. Why is that? And as for freight costs, we own. The government should tell the steam packet to take scrap for free. Well, I'm sure that Mr. Thompson would have something to say about that because he's running a company. He's running the steam packet as a company. It's not an arm of government. It's arm's length. So it's not a department within government. The Treasury is the shareholder, And I'm sure Mr. Thompson would have something to say if they suddenly started saying, and take all that scrap for free. Where do you draw the line? But anyway, point taken, Desmond. Thank you for that. I stripped my tumble dryer, took all the electrics, left with just metal and plastic, and they still wouldn't take it. They said, we still need to charge you for a tumble dryer, even though I'd taken it to pieces, says 578. Surely the reason why temperatures are rising at the moment, certainly not on the Isle of Man, though, is because of the solar maximum. The sun is more active at the moment. It's the reason we've had spectacular northern lights, says 068. And just a correction, the lower the barometric pressure, the worse the storm is usually, not higher. That's 653. The amenity site is a tip, not a recycling plant. Who voted for this? Actually, it's an amenity site. And don't blame them. You know, the people who run the amenity sites and the people who work there, the decisions are taken higher than them. So suddenly they've been forced down this route, and it's not something they choose, certainly. Aluminium cans, as I mentioned, go to the north of England. Steel cans, the metal merchants on the island export steel cans. Plastic and mixed bottles go to a reprocessor in the north of England. Glass is recycled on the Isle of Man. I think it's Balhara. Get the glass crushed into sand. It's used in road surfacing on the Isle of Man. Newspapers and magazines go to a paper mill in North Wales, and brown cardboard goes to a material reprocessor in the north of England. We're learning more and more about how to recycle, and certainly we are paying more and more to recycle, and I just wonder what you think about this and how far it's going to go. Regarding the issue of the school children on the steam packet vessels, I appreciate it's unfortunate that they've insisted on an increase in adults to look after children, but schools should realise children will be children, and unfortunately, if they become boisterous on the vessel, it is the other fare-paying passengers who are affected by this, and the consequences the steam packet themselves will complaints from other passengers. So surely it's incumbent on the schools to keep the children in order, says Ian. Well, this is a story about, basically, it's a complete failure and ludicrous, and the abuse of a monopolised position, not my words, just some of the ways in which political members have described changes to the steam packet's child-to-adult ratio policy. In October, the ferry provider revealed it was introducing as a safety measure, after an increase in the number of issues with the behaviour of children on vessels. So the Education Minister, Daphne Kane, told her Tynwald colleagues it could mean children won't be able to take part in off-island school trips anymore.
The Department of Education, Sport and Culture was not aware of the changes being made to the Steam Packets Group travel policy ahead of them being announced in October last year. The Department's policy for school trips, which is aligned with that of the UK Department for Education, stipulates a ratio of 1 adult per 10 children, plus 1 additional adult for the entirety of the group. The Department has made the Steam Packet aware that this discrepancy between our policy and their updated requirements poses challenges for organising school trips. The Department also advised that if the Steam Packet's declared position on these ratios remain the same, our island schools may not be in a position to facilitate any school trips off-island. The Department did ask the Steam Packet to consider aligning their group travel policy with, or more closely to, the Department's school trip supervision ratios. However, the Steam Packet advised that they are not in a position to change their policy, as it has been put in place with the health and safety of passengers and crew in mind. Although schools will need to comply with the ratios set by the Steam Packet in order to be allowed to travel, the Steam Packet has advised that they do recognise the position this has put schools in. Further discussions have taken place, and the Department is aware the Steam Packet are keen to work with all groups to address their concerns and have suggested different ways in which the child-adult ratios can be addressed. While the department recognises that educational visits provide a valuable opportunity for pupils and young people to encounter experiences which may not be available to them in the classroom, there are experiences offered through other educational facilities on the Isle of Man. The department is hopeful that with the help of the STEAM packet, suitable solutions can be found to ensure that school trips continue to go ahead.
I think what she means is we'd like them to change their mind. In a statement, the packet said, while we fully understand and appreciate the concerns of politicians, the public and business owners regarding economic and social impacts of our policy decisions, our first priority is always the ensuring the safety and comfort of passengers, crew and the vessels. As long as the vessel's comfortable at all times, we can't compromise on this. That's the word from the STEAM packet. What do you think about this? Any opinions on this? 1 to 10, so an adult per every 10 pupils, plus 1 for the group, that is. Any thoughts? Joe's on now. Hi, Joe.
No, it's Jerry.
Hello, Joey.
Jerry, Gerri.
Like I said, Jerry. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Andy. Right, love. Our home, we recycle everything, okay, from plastics, glass, tin cans, everything.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks. Now, and when we have cardboard, because we have a lot of cardboard, we take it down to the amenity site. Now, we believed that they are not taking cardboard across anymore. They are burning it in the incinerator. But I don't know how true that is, to be fair.
Wow. When did you hear this? Is this new? Is this new news or?
Well, this was last year. There was the back end of last year.
Right.
And what happened was we have a lot of stuff from Amazon and different places because my daughter's she's in a business of her own. And so we get a lot of cardboard. And I have asked Waste Management, and they've come and taken it for us before. But if we have a little bit more, we take it down to the amenity site, and they just tell us to put it in the skip. And we believe that, I know it was all getting packaged up and sent across.
Yeah.
And we were getting money for it. But I don't know now if they're still doing that. Because we got told that they weren't doing it anymore and they were just sending it to the incinerator. So I don't know, Andy, what to believe.
Well, it's as you say, we don't quite know what to believe. One person tells us one thing, and then you hear from something, as you say, like is this brown cardboard or all colours of cardboard?
Yes, darling. Brown cardboard, big cardboard boxes from Amazon and different places, and we just either. Nick either comes and gets it from Waste Management, which is a fantastic thing to do for us, or we take it down to the amenity site. But as I said, I don't know if they are taking it off island anymore and getting paid. Because at the Isle of Man, we're getting loads of money for cardboard.
Well, you'd like to think,
last couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Jerry. We appreciate that.
I'm so glad that the glass is going elsewhere and everything else is going, off island as well.
All right. Good to hear from you, Jerry. Thanks for that.
So, thank you so very much, Andy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Can you tell me, by the way, I mean, can we have this confirmed? Are they burning the brown cardboard now, or is it being collected? I think we're entitled to ask now, because it's obvious that we're paying a lot more. I mean, years ago, of course, you just paid, and the dustman or woman took it all away. The refuse people took all that away. Now it's got really complicated. Now, of course, there's the curbside collections, recyclables, the garden waste and everything else. And apparently, the none of the curbside collected recyclables go to the EFW, what we used to call the incinerator, the energy from waste plant. Anybody know this then? Does the brown cardboard get burnt now, or does it get recycled? Remember, the incinerator, the energy from waste plant burns what you put in your ordinary wheelie bin. The electricity generated makes a contribution to the Isle of Man's power generation, so it is an energy from waste plant. But recyclable materials like glass and cans have no calorific value, so it's recommended that they are recycled, and presumably they sort those out from the black bins. But it used to be so simple, didn't it? You put your stuff in the dustbin, it went away, that was the end of it. Now, crikey, You need a degree to make your way through it all. And what do you think about the steam packet? Now, with children, more adults to children ratio. Are children that badly behaved on the boat?
The winter clearance sale is now on in lifestyle furniture at the Mill, with up to 50% off our finest pieces. Style up your space for 2025 with best ever savings across our lovingly curated collections. Enjoy up to half price on world-renowned brands and design houses, including sublime dining and living furniture, superior sofas and more. The winter clearance sale, now on in lifestyle furniture at the Mill. Find us at the Courtyard, Tinwald Mill, St John's.
Are you confident enough to act quickly in a life-threatening emergency? How long has it been since you did a first aid course? Key skills can fade over time. That's why the Health and Safety Executive strongly recommends annual refreshers. St John Ambulance is here to help. Our courses empower you to act swiftly and confidently during emergencies. You'll learn to master CPR and know how to quickly use a defibrillator. In emergencies, a confident first aider can make all the difference. Call St John Ambulance on 674 387 today.
Are your details accurate on the electoral register? If you're aged 16 or over, registration is required and may improve your credit rating. If something has changed or you move house, you can update your details anytime. But if you want to vote in the local authority general elections in April, your information needs to be accurate before the 25th of March. Register or update your details online. It only takes a minute. Just search Electoral Register Isle of Man. For assistance, email elections@gov.im or telephone 685 754. Don't lose your vote. Register now.
Chinese New Year is almost here, and for 2025, we're welcoming the Year of the Snake. Join us on Wednesday as we start the celebration with a touch of good fortune, when the Manx Radio touring team will be handing out delicious fortune cookies across the island. And you can also indulge in a delicious Chinese afternoon tea at Mrs. Yang's in Douglas. It's the perfect blend of timeless tea traditions and fresh, exciting flavours. A unique way to experience the celebration. Celebrate Chinese New Year with Mrs. Yang's and your nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
17 minutes now before 1. When we was introduced, I worked for a water cooler manufacturer, says Nick, and we had to receive end-of-life equipment back to reuse it and to recycle it. If you Google which harbour was first to use radar, it says Douglas Harbour, says Mark. Thank you, Mark. The weather warnings are issued for public information. You can choose to read them and take notice or ignore them. What I don't understand, says Steve, is a small group of people who get triggered every time there's a weather warning and can't wait to get on social media, desperate to refute the forecast of an actual qualified meteorologist. And make just comments like, it's just winter. I think they're silly. If you're not interested in the notifications, ignore them, says Steve. Owning a small boat is becoming more attractive than dumping unwanted. Unwanted items will sink. You're not suggesting, Peter, surely. I've experienced being on the Mannin, sharing the passenger lounge with school parties. It's my opinion that the behaviour of the children is very much governed by the quality of supervision, not the adult-to-child ratio, says Paul in Maccled. I disagree with Julian on a lot of things, but if in was Manx Trump, I would appoint him to be Minister of Public Questions, to ask questions on behalf of the powers. I love the tenacity. There's been a change to paper in the paper to cardboard process, says WhatsApper 328. Not true with cardboards. They're getting shipped out as scrap. They take full trailers loaded with cardboard from Manx Utilities to the quay and get shipped out, says Marek from Manx Independent. I had a friend who worked in the crematorium in Leeds, and there was a company that used to come across to Leeds for free pickings. They got the titanium parts. What? Kneecaps and other joints, which would have been fitted before passing. All for free, says that. Germany and other parts of the world pick up the titanium from this. Is that true? Thank you, Will. I don't understand what you're trying to say, Will. If you want to give us a call, 66 13 68, we'd love to hear from you, Will. It's a pity They didn't put the 3 legs of man back up at the field at Knockalo. And I angle grinded and grinded an oven down to small pieces, bagged it and took it to the tip, says John in Onken. Did you really? Listening to that information about HMS Urley, my late father was based there in World War II, worked on the Barracudas, and they were known to be problematic, but his posting to the Isle of Man made him fall in love with the place, and he was thrilled to later become a stopover, and that's why I'm here on the beautiful Isle of Man, says Anne. The power of love, Anne, that's what it's all about. And coincidentally, Sam dropped me a note, and Sam says, my granddad was the ship's chaplain on HMS Urley. And he said that this is a ship's chaplain, so you take this word now. He said that the naval ratings used to heat their pies near the radar. Nobody knew then. Of course, radar is microwave. That's what microwave ovens are, radar-based. In fact, in America, they called them radar rangers in the 1970s. But Sam said his granddad, the ship chaplain of, are you following this, of HMS Valkyrie, says the ratings used to heat their pies near the radar. Recycling is a scam, says Will. None of the Manx public voted to implement recycling. It's like the green agenda. It's just to tax us. It's a heavy tax to make us all work more hours. And very interesting, says, and simple, says Will, you just squash the washing machine. How? Personally, here's a message in that just said, imagine the cost of wind turbine blade recycling, says Kenny H. Again, nobody tells us. Now, there are all sorts of conflicting reports that there are fields dug out full of hundreds and hundreds of wind turbine blades. Some of the people say that they can be recycled, but they don't tell you how. There are no companies that I can see, or can you tell me, who recycle wind turbine blades? Or maybe what they say is, well, we're waiting now for future technology. I mean, that's how everything gets solved in the world. Clever people invent interesting things. So somebody along the line is possibly working on recycling wind turbine blades. But we'll see. Fly tipping's bad enough, but it's only going to get worse, says 280. Bratton commissioners gave warnings to fly tipping instead of making an example. Now, these additional charges should be added to rates evenly throughout the Isle of Man, or preferably on an all-island rate. Is that an idea? As well as local authority rates and central income tax, there's a one-off charge right across the island for everybody, and that is for recycling. Or do we charge? And then the antisocial people sling their stuff into the sea, into the lanes, into the fields, or on the beaches. Why should we be forced to recycle, says John in Onken. Surely it should be a choice. And Charles dropped a note in, 598 Charles, can older, smaller electrical items not just be put in the bin? They're mostly plastic anyway. It's going to burn in the incinerator at Richmond Hill, which does produce some power for the grid. Just wondering, says Charles. We need information, don't we? Everyone seems to have overlooked that this new policy has come in after they've announced that children go free. So they double the amount of adults required for school trips to make up the lost revenue. And then they blame it on the behaviour. Is that so? Wow. Lexi dropped that in. So the new policies come in after they've announced that children go free, so they double the amount of adults required for school trips. Thank you, Lexi. My father served on the Valkyrie. Yes, he used to march up to Douglas Head each day, and he used to guard the prisoners that were in the hotels on the prom. He lied about his age to sign up for the war. He was only 15 when he was stationed here. He was 17 years old and stayed here till he passed away in 1983. Not bad for a young Cockney boy, says Charlie H. They were something else, weren't they, those boys? Apparently, they used to march them, as I say, they were quartered down on Loch Promenade and used to march them up the hill, double time sometimes. They must have had thighs like Mersey tugboats. There is a scrap value in all dump washing machines. But what happens to the money, says Alan. Well, we know what happens to ours. Many are concerned about green issues, says G, yet nothing has been said about Sellafield starting to process spent plutonium into ceramics to then be buried. Well, that's the issue with nuclear power, isn't it? It is very green. The trouble is you have some very dirty rocks at the end of it that you have to get rid of. Oh, Julian's back. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Andy. Just sounded a little quiet, so I heard a couple of comments earlier. Somebody said that the lower the pressure, the worse the storm. That is if you're talking about hurricanes. If you're talking about extratropical storms, like in higher latitudes, you have to look at what's called the pressure gradient, which is the greater the difference between the storm centre and the surrounding area. So that's why, for example, the great storm of 1987 had a much higher pressure than the one we just had, Storm Airwin, because the actual gradient of the pressure to the surroundings were different. Somebody mentioned about auroras. We are actually in a grand solar minimum called the EDDY, E-double-D-Y minimum. Now, the last huge aurora was the Carrington event in 1859, which is at the tail end of the Dalton minimum. So they do occur during... It's all to do with how one of those coronal mass ejection things fires off the sun and comes straight at us. And this is primarily why I think we're having the weird weather, because every time we've had these, which you can almost set your metronome on at about 210 years, the jet stream becomes loopy. So it starts to drop temperatures down and up. So like America, they were having 9 inches of snow in Florida, in Tallahassee. So if you look at it, you can quite clearly see that the jet stream is pulling down and then up again. And also, final thing, if we're being terrified with winds and storms, does it make sense to get our power from wind turbines if we're going to be having all these horrible storms in that case? Seems a silly thing to do, because they'll either be cut off or they'll be destroyed, won't they?
Well, there we are, you see. This is for minds far superior to mine to work out, Julian.
And mine as well.
Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Andy. Cheers.
When the Mannin Line's not on air, call Manx Radio to leave your opinion for broadcast on 682 631.
On the 4th of March, the House of Keys will choose 4 people to become members of the Legislative Council, one of which will replace Peter Greenhill MLC, who has decided to step down at the end of February when his 5-year term ends. He tells Agenda about his experiences over the past 5 years and gives some advice to prospective Legco candidates. That's Agenda this evening at 5:30 on Manx Radio with me, Phil Gaughan. If you are hoping to be nominated for one of the Legco seats, please get in touch so we can arrange an interview. Candidate or not, though, it's interesting to hear Peter Greenhill's thoughts on the role he's about to leave.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
6 minutes before 1. Radar Beats Manx Fog is the YouTube. If you put Radar Beats Manx Fog into a YouTube search, then that you should get that particular film. If I buy a company and it's mine, not the person who I pay to run it. So tell me, who bought the steam packet? Well, the Treasury bought the steam packet, Desmond. However, it's an arm's length company and they have a board of directors that run it. That's clear enough, isn't it? We may be the shareholder, but we don't run it. So we can't interfere in it. Otherwise there wouldn't be any point in having... You'd then have politicians. You wouldn't want politicians running the steam packet, would you? I agree with the steam packet's new policy regarding school trips. They're protecting other travellers and staff. Lack of discipline is the problem. Perhaps children ought to be taught how to behave in public spaces, says Osick said. I wasn't aware of this. Is there a problem with badly behaved children on the Isle of Man? You shouldn't take commercial or business cardboard to the amenity site, says John in Onken. Where should you put it? Maybe Daphne Kane should concentrate on educating the children. School trips aren't a given right. And when is she going to wield the axe? I don't know, Fran. Maybe you know more than I do. Douglas City Council ship a trailer out at least every week or so of cardboard, apparently. There's fly-tip rubbish by the Corony Estate in Maccled, where my daughter is, and that's been there for ages. One fella treats it like his own private tip. Oh, dear. It's just like the vandalism and graffiti by the playground that hasn't been dealt with, together with tons of dog mess. You can't use the dog bin and the vandals pushed it over. But it doesn't matter, as somebody's pulled the dog warning signs down. If you're not in Laxey or a millionaire in Maccled, Garth commissioners aren't bothered about you, says Derek. I'm sure they do, Derek. I'm sure they care very much about you. A Dutch company comes over and screens the bottom ash from the incinerator and collects lots of gold and silver. That company goes around the world doing this. Gold and silver. Wow. Fly tipping. We'll leave them on the beaches, we'll leave them in the fields, we'll leave them in the air. The Manx Churchill, that is. I've just swept around the lanes in Douglas today and I've found 2 televisions, prams, radiators, wardrobes and lots of other rubbish dumped, says Teddy the Viking. Fly tipping, just go around the back alleys in Douglas. It's all there. It's that time of year. I'm going to be off to the schools fairly shortly. This coming Thursday at Ramsey Grammar School with the students. And next Tuesday, Castle Rushen High School. The week after that, St Ninian's in Douglas. Just to see what tomorrow's voters, well, actually, a lot of them are qualified to be today's voters. So maybe they'll be voting in the local elections. But let's call them tomorrow's taxpayers. The 16 and 17-year-olds in our high schools, what do they have to say? This Thursday, Ramsey Grammar School. The subjects are chosen by them. They just talk about what they want to talk about. Maybe even VAR will come up. Right, that's it for today. Thanks for being involved. Thanks to Chris Quirk on the phones. And enjoy the rest of your Monday.
WINT